Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Here we are getting you your weekly dose of major international news with a perspective. I am Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. US and Turkey agree al-Assad should go for a free Syria even as Russia sends killer missiles to Syria. World Panorama takes a deeper look at the developments. Nawaz Sharif returns to be Pakistan's Prime Minister for the third time. Can he steer Pakistan out of crisis? David Beckham, celebrity and soccer star, retires from football. Football World pays tribute to the 38-year-old icon. And the 66th Cannes Film Festival opens in France with a cast of Great Gatsby. World Panorama brings you glimpses from the red carpet. Straight to the story in focus this week, the ensuing crisis in Syria. A proposed international conference on Syria should be held as soon as possible, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said on Friday, but no date has yet been agreed for that meeting that appears to face growing obstacles. The international meeting, now expected to take place in Geneva, some reports say in early June, hopes to build on a failed June 2012 peace initiative that called for the quick creation of a transitional government but defined no clear role for Assad. Meanwhile, Russia continues to deliver arms to Syria, the regime's most powerful remaining ally, but claims that it has no real interest in seeing Assad remain in power. But many continue to express alarm at Russia's decision to supply Syria with these various powerful missiles and question how this fits in with Russia's commitment to a negotiated end to the crisis. In a later statement, US President Barack Obama said that he will continue to press for Assad's ouster, even if this is no longer a precondition of the Geneva talks, a point that Russia insisted on adamantly. This week, we look at the Syrian crisis closely as the stakes for major world powers have been raised. What's Syria's future? Joining me on the show is Professor Savita Pande of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to the show, ma'am. Before I get to her to express her views on Syria, here's a look at this report.
Violence continued to erupt in parts of Syria. One amateur video posted on a social media website showed Syrian government fighter jet bombing a Damascus suburb. Another video focusing on the aftermath of massive shelling in homes, while one showed destroyed homes of historic significance in Palmyra homes. At the same time, efforts were on to chalk out a peaceful solution to end the bloodshed. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon and Russia agreed that a peace conference on Syria should be held as soon as possible.
We should not lose this momentum generated by Minister Lavrov and Secretary Kerry. There is a high expectation that this meeting should be held as soon as possible.
Even as Moscow defied growing global pressures over its arms supply to Damascus.
Я не понимаю, почему средства массовой информации пытаются делать из этого сенсацию.
I don't understand why this mass media wants to make a sensation of this. We haven't hidden that we supplied Syria with arms per a signed contract, not violating any international agreements, not violating our own laws that pertain to export control, some of the strictest in the world.
Поставляем мы прежде всего оборонительные вооружения, системы противовоздушной обороны.
President Barack Obama said on Thursday he reserves the right to resort to a range of both diplomatic and military options if he receives conclusive proof that the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has used chemical weapons in the country's civil war.
There are a whole range of options that the United States is already engaged in, and I preserve the options of taking additional steps, both diplomatic and military, because those chemical weapons inside of Syria also threaten our security over the long term, as well as our allies and friends and neighbors.
Meeting Barack Obama, Turkish Prime Minister reaffirmed Turkey's full consensus with the United States on the need to end the bloodshed in Syria quickly and instigate a political transition to a government without Assad.
Our goal is to see the tyranny, the dictatorship go away in Syria and be replaced with democracy. And I think this is a collective responsibility on the part of all the countries that believe in democracy, and this is what we will all continue to do.
The Turkish Prime Minister's visit to Washington this week came just days after car bombs tore through a Turkish border town in the deadliest spillover of violence from Syria yet. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State John Kerry is engaged in intensive diplomatic efforts to relaunch the Middle East process. The Syrian conflict started with mainly peaceful demonstrations against Assad, but turned into a civil war in which the United Nations says at least 80,000 people have been killed. Islamist militants have emerged as the most potent of the anti-Assad rebels.
All right, Professor Pande, then let me take this forward. This pending international meeting on Syria, what are the expectations really, and how is this meeting going to be different? And we're hoping some results really. Will that happen?
Well, it is, seeing the way things are going, very difficult. The vetoes by Russia and China, their very strong position, Russia's insistence on sending the arms, no relenting on that. And also the French opposition to Iran's presence. You know, that's the. These are some of the issues which will dog the meeting, pre-meeting also. And at the meeting, the Chinese in their resolution have not said anything about Assad's role. After all, he has to have a role in transition, which even the resolution doesn't define. So very little different from what the outside scenario exists at the moment. Plus the two countries, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who are going to be outside and yet inside. You know. To expect an overnight change is very difficult. The United States and Turkey would insist on Assad's ouster, but then what next? And how the transition is to be brought about, they haven't said anything. So you cannot suggest that this should not be there, but you have to say what should follow. You know. And in that, we already saw in the last speech, which we just saw, the talk of responsibility to protect, which I think countries like China don't think much about.
Right. So what about the role of regional powers, like you mentioned, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all these countries? Do you think some sort of intervention at the military level is needed at this point in time? Or perhaps say what should be the US's role? For once, do you think the US should just take a back seat and watch these regional allies, you know, do something as far as Syria is concerned and not go head on directly?
Yes, it is tough. It is tough for US to you know, stay aside and yet be, you know, it's almost like return of Cold War and post-Cold War. For the first time, we see the two sides almost, you know, supporting two rival groups and themselves also facing a problem when they had this spy problem and Moscow really took it very strongly this time. So, you know, how far they would go in inviting the enemy, you know, that remains to be seen. Plus, you're forgetting a very important factor, Israel, you know. And, you know, once that player comes into the picture, then you have the Hamas, you have the Iranians, you have the Syrians staying together on one side, the Hezbollah. They are on one side against you know, the Syrians. So it is going to be a world play of politics at the conference also, and resolution seems very distant.
We will be discussing more about the resolution in just a bit after this report. In fact, the UN General Assembly strongly condemned the Syrian government for its indiscriminate shelling and bombing of civilians and widespread and systematic human rights violations. The resolution, co-sponsored by most Arab and Western governments, was adopted by a vote of 107 to 12 with 59 abstentions. The United States backed the resolution and Russia opposed it, putting them on opposite sides as they struggle to start talks between the Syrian government and opposition on a political transition. The General Assembly measure is not legally binding, remember, but it reflects Syria's growing isolation. Take a look.
The UN General Assembly condemned President Bashar al-Assad's escalation of the Syrian war on Wednesday as rebels battled to free inmates from a prison in the key city of Aleppo. After 3 years of civil war and with the death toll topping 90,000, leaders and envoys from the world and regional powers are shuttling between capitals trying to drum up support for a negotiated end to the bloodshed.
The 80,000 people killed who were the victims of violence in Syria, were they all terrorists? If the government has killed 80,000 terrorists, terrorism would have ended all over the world. You have listened to a clever attempt to divert attention from the reality of the situation.
But the way forward is difficult, as shown by the vote of Syria's key ally, Russia, a Permanent Security Council member that fiercely opposed the UN resolution passed by 107 votes to 12 at the 193-member assembly.
This document, just as the two similar documents adopted in 2012, resolutions by the General Assembly, is clearly one-sided text. The full responsibility for the project development of events is put on the shoulders of the Syrian government, and this in spite of obvious facts including recognized by authoritative international organizations about the illegal actions of the armed opposition, including terrorist actions.
The resolution drawn by the Qatar and other Arab states with Western backing expressed outrage at the rapidly increasing death toll in Syria. It also condemned the continued escalation in the use by the Syrian authorities of heavy weapons and of ballistic missiles against civilians.
Adopting this resolution will send a clear message that the political solution we all seek is the best way to end the suffering of the people of Syria. We support this resolution, have co-sponsored it, and urge member states to vote in favor of it.
Unlike Security Council resolutions, which are legally binding, General Assembly resolutions cannot be enforced. But approval of an Assembly resolution would counter the paralysis of the deeply divided Security Council, where Syria's allies, Russia and China, have voted 3 Western-backed resolutions aimed at pressing Assad to end the violence.
All right, talking about the resolution now, Professor Pande, we have seen that there is a decline in support for this resolution, and the main reason, what reports are saying, is that the strengthening of the Islamist extremist element within the rebels is one of the main reasons. Do you believe this is one of the main reasons, and what other reasons do you think are responsible for the decline?
Yes, it puts a lot of onus on the Syrians themselves who are unable to solve the problem. And the basic problem is sectarian, everybody may be in a denial mode, but the fact remains, it is the Shia minority ruling over the Sunni majority. And the same kind, Iran, Iraq's, the whole involvement is at that sectarian level. Then you see some of the crucial countries in General Assembly staying out, India including, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and Brazil. These were the countries who were neither this side or that side, and the countries which were divided or supporting or opposing were already so on the Syrian solution. So I personally don't think that General Assembly resolution makes much of a difference. It actually tells you what the scene of the global situation is. As far as political solution is concerned, who is wanting a political solution? Frankly, if you look at the Russians, they are busy supplying arms. The Chinese, they want to have a finger. Of course, they don't have much economic interest, despite Syria being a large oil supplier. The Chinese want to say we are there on the scene. And in fact, their role now in the Israeli leadership being in China and a proactive role at the world scene in the Middle East shows that. So everybody is playing one's own game in the region, and in the process complicating the solution to the crisis even more.
Right. So if the West were to intervene, you think that this extremist element is such that it will have to actually focus more on the Al-Qaeda kind of forces rather than going after Bashar al-Assad, because Assad, remember, still has a very, very strong support within Syria.
Yes. And this Free Syrian Army, actually I was reading somewhere this Free Syrian Army should actually be called MWG, Men with Guns. Anybody with gun is part of this, including Al-Qaeda. They could take a pretext of Al-Qaeda, but I, for one, at the moment would rule out military intervention by the United States. They have seen what happened in Afghanistan, they've seen what happened in Iraq, where they didn't have this kind of direct opposition by the greater powers. So they would not militarily intervene. They will continue to express that Russians would definitely take a proactive stand. The Chinese would definitely take a proactive stand, which they did not take in Afghanistan, which they did not take in Iraq. Right. So the Americans will not take a direct action, and political solution would continue to be Assad must go. And if Assad goes, who is going to come next? And if they talk about the elections, which they have said about 2014, you don't know if he wins, if he gets into it, who will replace him, or his choice should come, which they don't talk about in the resolution. Absolutely. So to me, it seems a very far-fetched way of resolving. I think all of them are paying a lip service to saying that we want a political solution, but have no solution on their platter to offer.
All right. Remember, it's not just a political crisis, also the humanitarian crisis. And these talks in Geneva could be perhaps groundbreaking. Let's hope. Wait and watch what really happens. Professor Pande, it was a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me. All right. With that, time for a short break. After that, UN nuclear talks with Iran failed to end deadlock. Iran says it's ready for nuclear talks with world powers. Stay tuned. We'll be back. You're You're watching World Panorama. Now, talks between UN nuclear watchdog and Iran about Tehran's nuclear program failed to clinch an accord, and no date has been set for more meetings. This was the 10th round of talks since the beginning of last year. With Iran focused on a presidential election next month, expectations had been low for the meeting between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, which has been trying for more than a year now to reopen an inquiry into possible military dimensions of Tehran's nuclear work.
A day after meeting EU Foreign Policy Chief, Iran's top nuclear negotiator Saeed Jalili said that nuclear talks with Catherine Ashton were long and useful, and that both sides have decided to continue the discussions.
We agreed to review the ideas that have been put forward, and we underlined the importance of continuing our talks. Talks will definitely continue. We are ready to continue talks with P5+1 whenever they want to, wherever they are ready.
Jalili's meeting with Ashton, who oversees talks with Iran on behalf of the United States, Russia, China, France, Britain and Germany, followed a failed summit in April in the Kazakh city of Almaty. Jalili also reiterated that Iran would never abandon its right to enrich uranium. Earlier on Wednesday, Iran expressed its desire to work together with the International Atomic Energy Agency and continue to finalize a nuclear inspection framework. Iran's envoy to the IAEA, Ali Asghar Sultani, was characteristically more upbeat, saying that the next meeting would see a deal finalized, although Nakarats of the IAEA said no new gathering had been arranged.
This is continuation of the previous discussion. We were able to identify some of the elements that we need to work out together. In fact, both sides gave written proposals on those points. And we decided that both sides will use the time from now until next meeting to work out on the language which will bridge the gap for ultimate conclusion of this structured approach.
The IAEA wants Iran to grant access to sites, documents and scientists involved in Tehran's alleged efforts to develop atomic weapons, which the agency suspects mostly took place before 2003, but are possibly still going on.
Intensive discussions today, but could not finalize the structured approach document that has been on the negotiation for a year and a half now. So our commitment to continued dialogue is unwavering. However, we must recognize that our best efforts have not been successful so far. So we will continue to try and complete this process. And as Ambassador Sultani said, a date for the next meeting has still to be set. I thank you very much.
Iran says IAEA's findings are based on faulty intelligence from foreign spy agencies such as the CIA and Israel's Mossad. Intelligence, it complains, it has not even been allowed to see. 9 rounds of talks since the publication of a major IAEA report in November 2011 have produced no breakthrough.
Nawaz Sharif's PML-N has emerged as the single largest party in Pakistan's landmark general elections with 123 of the 272 parliamentary seats, but fell short of a majority and would now be forming a government with the support of independents and smaller parties. Incoming Prime Minister Sharif on Monday reached out to India and the United States, pledging to strengthen relations after his thumping victory in elections. Here's a roundup of Pakistan's historic elections.
Pakistan achieved a historic landmark with the completion of its 5-year term by the civilian coalition government led by Pakistan People's Party (PPP) and the successful completion of elections, resulting in clear victory for Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan Muslim League (PML-N).
I am so overjoyed that I don't know where I should begin. We are all waiting for this day, the day of empowerment of the people.
According to the latest results announced by the Election Commission of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan Muslim League (N) has attained an overwhelming lead with 124 seats out of 254 National Assembly seats. The first runner-up is Pakistan People's Party with 32 seats, while Imran Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf has secured 28 seats. Pakistan's incoming Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif reached out to India and the United States, pledging to strengthen relations after his thumping victory in landmark elections.
अमेरिका समेत तमाम मुल्कों के साथ अच्छे ताल्लुकात चाहते हैं और अपने मसाइल का भी हल चाहते हैं और मैं समझता हूँ जो पाकिस्तान के अंदर हमें मसाइल जिनका का हमें सामना करना पड़ रहा है, हम उनको खुश उसलूबी के साथ, बातचीत के जरिए के साथ और जो है वो बुर्दबारी के साथ हम उनको हल करें।
Sharif said he had a long chat with Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the two exchanged invitations to visit, a diplomatic nicety in some parts of the world but a heavily symbolic step for South Asia's arch rivals.
But we'll be very happy to invite him. Whether he can come or not is a different...
I'm sure he will come if you invite him.
But I hope that he will visit Pakistan soon.
Politicians in India have mixed reactions to Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's invitation to Nawaz Sharif.
पाकिस्तान हमारा देश दोनों अभी विकास हो रहा है। हमारा सरकार का इच्छा है ये पूरा पाकिस्तान आतंकवाद खत्म करना, उसको अभी उन्होंने काम करना। उन्होंने आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री को इनवाइट किया, ये अच्छा अभी संदेश चल रहा है।
उनका एक ही एजेंडा है कि हिंदुस्तान के साथ हमेशा प्रॉक्सी वॉर करे, बॉर्डर पे वॉर करे, कश्मीर में वॉर करे, हिंदुस्तान में टेररिज्म करके इस प्रकार से हिंदुस्तान को अस्थिर बनाए। उस बारे में पाकिस्तान की भूमिका क्या रहेगी, आने वाले 2 महीने में हमें उस बारे में पता चलेगा। बाद में आप देखिए क्या होता है, लेकिन इतनी जल्दबाजी अच्छी नहीं है।
Pakistan suffers from a growing energy crisis, with some areas experiencing power outages for up to 18 hours a day. That has seriously hurt the economy, pushing growth below 4% a year. The country needs a growth rate of twice that to provide jobs for its expanding population of 180 million. Sharif is seen by many as likely to tackle the country's economic problems effectively because much of his party's support comes from businessmen. He is also expected to push for better relations with Pakistan's arch-enemy and neighbor India, which could help the economy.
Time now to take a look at some of the other international news in a quick wrap. Here's Globe Watch.
Greek Prime Minister Antonis Samaras met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing, where the two countries pledged to increase trade and investment. The main goal of Samaras' visit is to push ahead privatization of Greece's state-owned assets. At least 12 people were killed and 25 others injured when a suicide bomber blew himself up at a Shia mosque in northern Iraq. The suicide bomber entered the Al-Zahra mosque in Kirkuk, some 250 kilometers north of Baghdad, and then blew himself up, according to police sources. On Thursday, a series of car bombs and a gunfire attack in Shia neighborhoods in Baghdad and the northern city of Mosul left at least 11 people dead and 45 wounded. Cyclone Mahasan buffeted Bangladesh's low-lying coast on Thursday, killing at least 6 people after forcing many thousands into emergency shelters, but authorities downgraded warnings later in the day as the storm lost strength. Bangladesh, where storms have in the past killed many thousands of people, has more than 1,400 cyclone-proof buildings and many people moved into them as Mahasan approached. A United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket boosted a new global positioning system satellite into space on Wednesday, the latest in a series of upgraded navigation beacons with improved accuracy and longevity. The $121.3 million GPS-2F4 satellite, the fourth in a series of 12 being built by Boeing, was scheduled to be released from the Centaur's second stage 3 hours and 24 minutes after launch. Following tests and checkout operations, the 3,600-pound solar-powered satellite will be turned over to the Air Force for operational use.
And now a look at all the sports news that you might have missed this week. A quick look at that in sports action.
David Beckham has retired from football, bringing an end to a glittering career on the field. Since his debut for Manchester United 2 decades ago, the 38-year-old has emerged as arguably the most iconic sportsman of his generation, captaining England, collecting 115 caps, and celebrated as a champion in 4 different countries, the only British footballer in history to do so. Despite the offer of an extended 1-year deal at Paris Saint-Germain, the 38-year-old has played his last game, bowing out on a high after helping Carlo Ancelotti's side win the French title for the first time in 19 years. 3 Indian cricketers have been arrested over allegations of spot fixing in the Indian Premier League. The players S. Sreesanth, Ankit Chavan and Ajit Chandala are all from Rajasthan Royals. The Board of Control for Cricket in India immediately suspended Sreesanth and his teammates Ankit and Ajit and promised stricter punishments if they are found guilty. Match winner Branislav Ivanovic said Chelsea deserved to win the Europa League with a 2-1 success over Benfica. The Serbian defender headed a stoppage time winner from a corner to secure a second successive European trophy for the Premier League side after they won the Champions League for the first time last season.
Chelsea were playing their 68th game of a marathon season and were only in the Europa League after dropping into it after becoming the first Champions League winners to be eliminated in the group stage the following season. Honda is returning to Formula One racing in 2015 after a 7-year hiatus as McLaren's engine partner. The link-up between Honda and McLaren, the second most successful team in the sport after Ferrari in terms of race wins and drivers' titles, will revive one of the greatest Formula One partnerships, which was marked by multiple championships with the late Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost between 1988 and 1992. Honda, who will replace Mercedes as McLaren's engine partner, withdrew from the sport in late 2008 in the middle of a global financial crisis after years of hardly ever winning. And time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Angelina Jolie revealed on Tuesday that she has undergone a double mastectomy to reduce her high risk of breast cancer, saying she is speaking out to encourage women to address threats to their health. The 37-year-old American actress wrote in an opinion piece entitled My Medical Choice in the New York Times that she had chosen the procedure because she carries a faulty gene that increases her risk of both breast and ovarian cancer. Starship Enterprise crewmates Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto and Zoe Saldana ventured onto the red carpet for the Hollywood premiere of the J.J. Abrams-directed sci-fi flick Star Trek Into Darkness. The second Star Trek film under the skillful guidance of Abrams finds the franchise, which is based on Gene Roddenberry's iconic 1960s television show, in good hands. The film also stars Alice Eve, Carl Urban and John Cho. Star Trek Into Darkness released in the US on May 15th. Booksellers are predicting that Da Vinci Code author Dan Brown's latest title, Inferno, will become the biggest-selling book of the year. Sales of the book, which sees the return of fictional symbologist Robert Langdon, have already reached the highest level of customer pre-orders at retailer Waterstones since the release of Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling's adult fiction The Casual Vacancy last year. Dozens queued outside the Waterstones Piccadilly branch of the bookshop in London to obtain signed copies of the book.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. As I sign off, take a look at all the glitz and glamour as the 66th Cannes Film Festival kicked off this week with a cast of Great Gatsby. Goodbye and thanks for tuning in.
I understand you're looking for a business connection.
He had an extraordinary sense of hope.
Milk tea.